All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Schwab, and I'm the Associate Director for International House and Special Programs at Illinois State University. On behalf of the Office of International Studies and Programs, I would like to formally welcome you all to the Spring 2022 International Seminar Series titled ISU International Engagement. This series is one of many programs developed by our office to assist in comprehensive campus internationalization and emphasize the benefits of social, cultural, and linguistic knowledge beyond what is represented in our home countries. This series will focus on a wide variety of internationalization efforts taking place on the ISU campus. Also this semester, all events will be available as Zoom webinars. As an attendee, you can submit questions to our presenters through the Zoom Q&A function, which we will relay to the presenters after the presentation. If you are encountering technical difficulties, you can message event staff using the chat function, and we will do our best to assist you. You will also note that we are recording today's presentation, and we hope to have the recording available later this week for those that wish to access it. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Dr. John Baldwin, Dr. Lance Lippert, and Dr. Joseph Zompetti, presenting on the topic of internationalizing the ISU curriculum. They are all professors in the ISU School of Communication, and this talk is based on a book chapter they published in 2019 entitled The Internationalization of a Communication Studies Major, A Global Redesign. Dr. Baldwin earned his PhD at Arizona State University and studies domestic and international diversity, identity, and intolerance, including issues of diversity, cross-cultural adaptation, and competence. Dr. Zompetti earned his PhD at Wayne State University and has taught in 30 countries, including 3 Fulbright grants in Sri Lanka, Brazil, and Kyrgyzstan. His research interests include the relationship between cultural meanings and democratic impulses, ideological messages, including issues pertaining to fake news and disinformation, and rhetorical expressions of power and resistance. Dr. Lance Lippert earned his PhD from Southern Illinois University. He is the program coordinator for the Communication Studies program in the School of Communication, and Lance has published on topics in the areas of organizational, health, and instructional communication. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to these wonderful professors so that they can share their expertise regarding curriculum internationalization. My friends.
Thank you, Matt. On behalf of John and Lance and myself, we just want to thank Matt and Linda and Jackson, who are facilitating today's webinar, as well as everyone from the International Studies program and the wonderful support that we've received throughout the years with some of the programs and efforts that we've been trying to do in the School of Communication. And that's really what we want to talk to you about today, is one of the initiatives that we've implemented in the School of Communication, particularly with our Communication Studies major. We've always been supporters of study abroad. In fact, we have 4 separate study abroad programs within the School of Communication itself. And we've always been strong advocates for internationalization in general. But one of the things that occurred to us probably around 2015 or so was that many of our students are unable to enjoy the experience of study abroad. And around that time, the university also established as one of its pillars of diversity and an emphasis on internationalization. So we felt pretty strongly that we needed to find a way to try to internationalize some of our teaching in a way that didn't simply require a study abroad experience. So in other words, how can we bring the international community here to Normal, Illinois? And so in 2017, we applied for a grant with the International Studies program to internationalize our Communication Studies major. We adopted the concept of global learning into our curriculum changes. And as Hovland in 2016 defines global learning, they say that through global learning, students should, 1, become informed, open-minded, and responsible people who are attentive to diversity across the spectrum of differences. 2, seek to understand how their actions affect both local and global communities. And 3, address the world's most pressing and enduring issues collaboratively and equitably. As such, we then reaffirm what Doscher and Landorf in 2018 note when they say that global learning is a pedagogical process that stresses skills to address complex problems that transcend borders, since it enables participants to discern the interconnectedness of local and global well-being. In short, global learning involves the awareness of diverse perspectives from multiple cultural vantage points so that citizens realize the interconnected relationships between different peoples. So we felt pretty strongly that communication studies as a major could help facilitate this kind of awareness and this kind of learning. We offer a variety of courses that we felt could help implement or instill this sort of learning into the classroom. We also discovered around the same time, and I apologize, I don't have the citation with me, but around the 2015, there was a study that was done that suggested that around 80% of jobs in the state of Illinois had some sort of international dimension or component to it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that someone works at a particular job in the state of Illinois that they would be traveling to to Kenya or to Papua New Guinea or to India or something like that. But it does mean or does suggest that these jobs have some kind of interconnected relationship with the global community. So perhaps a client could be from abroad, or someone could be an expatriate that comes to the United States and begins working in that particular job, that industry, and in which case the higher our global competence level is, the better we be able to interact with such folks, and would improve not only our relationships with people from around the world, but it would also improve the productivity and the work in such industries. So we felt pretty strongly that these are not only important benchmarks that we could establish in a classroom for knowledge sake, but also would have tangible, real world, lifelong skills that we could instill and help our students to obtain that would yield material benefits for them when they enter the job market. So what does all that mean? Well, it means that when we applied for this grant, we decided we wanted to ask the faculty in the communication studies major to redesign some of their courses to add an international component to it. Now that had a lot of flexibility to it. Some folks chose to radically redesign their course so that the entire course became internationally focused. For example, my course, that happened. We have a political communication course called Com 371, which was in general, used to be about political campaigns and so forth. But I completely redesigned that course so that it even has a new title called International Political Communication, where we study the political communication from various countries and regions around the world. So an entire course could be redesigned, or someone could add a component to the semester, maybe a unit or a reading or a couple of readings that would allow the students in that particular class to see connections that go beyond just Central Illinois or even the United States, but rather to see how connections can be made across the globe. So instead of just adding some of these international components, though, we also wanted to be as intentional as possible in terms of sequencing and scaffolding of the courses. So that required us to align our goals of teaching skills and learning objectives within the courses so that if a student took one class, that could prepare them for a subsequent class and so forth. So it required quite a bit of logistical maneuvering on the part of our program coordinator, Dr. Lippert, who I'm sure will talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but to try to arrange some of these redesigned classes in such a way that our students could receive the maximum benefit. And this alignment with learning outcomes also helps facilitate not only the course assessment, so in other words, are the students learning what they should be learning in a particular course, but it also helps with our overall programmatic assessment. And so we wanted to be mindful then in general of what is known as internationalization of the curriculum. There is a scholar named Leask who is at the forefront of this type of pedagogy. And she notes that there are 5 stages to internationalizing the curriculum. And we try to adopt this in our own model. The first is to review and reflect, which means essentially, what is it that we're currently offering? What sort of gaps are there? Where are there deficiencies and so forth? Second is to imagine. So imagine what an ideal major might look like. Imagine what it is that we could have our students learn and then translate into productive skills. Third, revise and plan. So in other words, look carefully and critically at what we have and then what we can feasibly and practically do so that we can implement it with maximum efficiency. 4 is to act, which simply means to implement the design and the goals. And then 5, to evaluate, which is in our mind one of the most crucial aspects in this, and that is to assess the program and the initiative to see what went well, what didn't go well, what we could do better in the future, and so forth. So simply put, internationally our curriculum meant that we provided a unifying framework to invite diverse ways of knowing, as well as pedagogies that promote cross-cultural understanding and the development of the knowledge, skills, and values to successfully engage with others in an increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. John Baldwin, who was instrumental in our redesign and programmatic changes, because part of what our grant allowed us to do was also to train the faculty in the communication studies major so that they could be as competent as possible when teaching this material. And so Dr. Baldwin was our facilitator for that. So I'll turn it over to him.
I always like to start with a story. So for today, my story deals with one of our new Kenyan students several years ago. We have much more international graduate students than undergraduates. And even before the classes started, the student had met me at orientation and had friended me on Facebook. So I felt this collegial relationship. And one day, even before classes started, he and I were walking and we met each other at a corner in the quad facing each other. And he said, "After you, Dr. Baldwin." And I said, no, after you, Gilbert. And there's this awkward pause. And he said, no, really, after you, Dr. Baldwin. And I said, "This is one of those status things, isn't it?" And he said, "Yes, sir, it is. I cannot go first." So I thanked him for the pleasure and walked first. Later on, I actually tried to hold the door open for him as I was leaving the building, and he stopped and wouldn't go through the door until I had gone through first. So I've done some writing and some training here on campus about working with international graduate students. So what I want to talk about today, and I'm going to share a PowerPoint for my portion here, is the training that we did, basically the content of the training. We had 2 sessions of training, one in the fall and one in the spring. So the first one is really an orientation to the idea. We begin, of course, first of all, with the notion of why is internationalization important, something I don't need to tell to this audience. But in this case, we asked our faculty participants what internationalization meant, why they felt it was important for students and for their classes. From there, I introduced a broader notion of internationalization that I've worked on with the International Studies Advisory Council, and I met some of our participants through that, where really internationalization doesn't simply deal, as Joe said, with students going abroad, but also with our students going abroad, with bringing other students here, with our faculty going abroad, with other faculty coming here, and for our purposes, specifically in content and programming regarding understanding other cultures. That is, we treat internationalization very broadly, with study abroad being only a small portion of what is possible for a department. From there, we talked about the goals of internationalization and what our efforts should be in terms of internationalizing. We're borrowing these goals both from the formerly called Office of International Studies and Programs, but also from the intercultural competence literature. Basically, it suggests the main ideas of knowledge, attitudes, and skills. A whole bunch of our knowledge in terms of either diversity and inclusion training, but also international training, can be knowledge training. We're giving facts, learning about other cultures. But basically, we understand that if we don't change people's willingness to interact, their attitudes, their feelings towards interacting with people who are different from them, then really the knowledge training doesn't do much of anything impactful. They might get a good score on a test, but I believe our goal is to make more responsible and interactive citizens. So we're working on knowledge, attitudes, and skills of different sorts in these classes. We still have not gotten down to brass tacks with these specific classes. So we talked to the faculty about some different things that the Study Abroad Office, or the Office of International Studies and Programs at the time, offered. And I do have some links here, and certainly Matt Schwab can provide these as well. such as international student ambassadors. There's a list of these with a web link from the Office of International Studies and Programs. I think it's now the Office of International Engagement. And basically students from all over the world who are just lined up wanting to come and talk to your class. So we have the International Studies Seminar, which you might have heard of. Oh, wait, that's what we're doing right now. International Education Week, pre-COVID, guest speakers, involvement with international students. So at different times, some group has come on campus. For example, a few years ago, there was a group from Brazil who was here studying English. They were at a fairly high level. The office contacted me, said, we'd love to get these students into a class. I said, absolutely, bring them to my class. That day in Intercultural Comm, we were talking about sex and gender differences in communication. So I paired up the Brazilians with my American students, and they talked about differences and similarities between the two cultures in terms of sex and gender differences. Another day in one of my other classes, Psychology of Language, we were just talking about the basic elements of language, phonemes, morphemes, semantics, syntax, and a group from China was on campus. And they said, we're looking for a place for our Chinese students to see an American teacher. I said, bring them on. We found a bigger classroom. Then I introduced with Chinese examples each of those concepts so that they could talk to my students about similarities and differences between Chinese sounds and Chinese grammar. Also, there's chances for involvement with international students. In different times, there have been friendship programs, international language partner programs. So there are just a different bunch of possibilities. Visiting scholars in our departments, curriculum considerations. We talked a lot about different ways to incorporate this into specific classes. And of course, internationalization of faculty, such as our faculty presenting abroad when possible, working with study abroad, working with international students. So just really internationalization very broadly. Finally, after all this was done, we talked about a bunch of possibilities, and then we began to brainstorm and goal set with specific faculty. Someone has, for example, a research methods class. 297 is about statistics and survey designs. And the faculty member said, I don't even know how to introduce internationalization in my course. And we said, well, you're already covering sample studies from survey design or media analysis. So just do a media analysis from Greece or from Italy or from Africa. So just to start bringing in examples. So now in my language class, when we're talking about language learning, and there's different ways children learn language, what I do is I have articles from 3 different cultures where the studies are just done in those different cultures. We're just incorporating examples into our classes. We talked then with specific faculty. For example, we have an introduction to communication theory class. And basically it's all different communication theories. And we talked with the instructor of that class and we said, what can we do to internationalize this course? So we introduced a brief unit on non-Western theories where I would go and I would talk about Afrocentrism and Asia-centrism and sort of non-Western ways to think about theory and knowledge so that the students are just exposed to a diversity of concepts. Sometimes faculty would bring their syllabi. We would look at their syllabi and work on goals to say, how can we change the goals? So we actually, in our chapter, have a list of actually specific objectives from syllabi from the different faculty that illustrate how they're trying to bring international concepts or awareness into the faculty. As one last example before I go on to the specific training, right now I'm teaching a course called Communication and the Aging Process, or Communication and Aging. So what we will do is during one unit in the class, we have a chapter that talks about cultural difference, and I will probably contact the international advocates over at Office of International Engagement and have some of the international students come and talk about what is it like getting older in your culture? How does your culture view and communicate with older adults? And then my students can actually see or hear an international perspective from people from the cultures themselves. So we're just looking for a variety of ways to bring students in contact with other cultures. As Joe mentions, an idea of scaffolding to where it's not just a class, but it's something that students are presented with across a diversity of classes. During the second session, basically, I introduced people to basic concepts of culture and how these might impact the classroom itself. This is especially for faculty who have international students. So we talk about an iceberg model of culture, how culture most scholars now, or many scholars, are not thinking of culture as nation, but culture as region, as group difference. to where really culture is all around us, even if we're not dealing with international cultures. We talk about the specific cultural differences in learning styles and participation and other things in the classroom, cultural values, and specifically pragmatics of difference in things such as grading, student-teacher interactions, our relationship with our international graduate students, and how that might be shaped by culture. So an international graduate student might arrive in my office with different expectations for me as an advisor than someone from my own culture. Finally, after this, we do a little bit of brainstorming to say how might cultural difference or students from different cultures impact things such as how much detail you provide on the assignments that you give. You know, sometimes I might give students a position paper and say, write an argument. The paper comes back to me and I realize I don't think this student has the same picture of argument that I have in my head. My picture of an argument is based very much on a neo-Aristotelian logical deductive formula. The student might be arguing from a cyclical perspective or something, seeking and giving feedback. Students from some cultures might not come to my office to get feedback because of the status difference, and they don't feel that like they can. What are my expectations for assignments for writing, especially if the student is writing in a different English than I'm used to, or if they're writing in English as a second language? How do I motivate students? What motivations do students bring to the classrooms? What are some possible misunderstandings? Do I grade for participation when many students, even if they do speak English, they don't know the pattern and the interaction patterns of the American classroom, where in America, even differences between other English-speaking countries, we raise our children with the idea of share your thoughts in class. Let's work on this together and come up with an answer. So we talk about that. And of course, the idea of plagiarism and how that differs from culture to culture. So basically, we need to make our expectations clear. After that, then we move to assessment. I'll turn it over to Dr. Lippert to talk about assessment. Oh, I have to stop sharing. Oh, I'm not going to stop sharing. I just want to mute myself. But I can't hear you, Lance.
Hi. I had the screen and I couldn't find my mute, which is always handy to know where that's at with me. You know, now this explains, John, why you and Joe always have to walk through a door first. I guess I understand the power difference there. Now I always hold the door, then follow the status. I have a confession to make too. I guess I'm still a little bit ethnocentric. And I don't know how I ever shake that. You know, maybe it's where I grew up, but I continue to try to evolve as a global citizen, and that's always tough. And I learned so much from working with these two gentlemen, and also what we've done in the School of Communication, not to brag too much, but the Civic Engagement minor evolved from our program. The redesign process has evolved from our program. The Center for Civic Engagement evolved from our program. And so I feel like we've been in touch with this. And the interesting thing is too, we have insights, but we're not successful at sustaining that. And it is fascinating that we also found that a lot of our faculty, right, fellows, that were already including global or internationalization learning outcomes in their courses. But part of growth means that, and sustainability means that we have to go in and try to intentionally capture that so we can repeat it again. And we're not looking for specific outcomes that say, oh, look at us, but we're looking for outcomes that can say, look at our students. We've been fortunate, as I said, to have a lot of insightful colleagues and people in our program, as well as like Matthew and colleagues over at the Office of International Study program. So I think assessment is huge, and our workplace is changing so drastically. Now we know that because of COVID, working remotely or in person. But think about our workplace right now, probably in the United States in this age of resignation or quit, so much shift due to external things, not just internal issues, but and the boundaries between personal and professional blurring. And it's a workplace, at least in our country, where there's going to be 4, maybe 5 generations at work. And you can leave that up, John. I'll get to it. 4 or 5 generations at work, not to mention how global it is now. So it's imperative that our students not just admit to their ethnocentrism and try to work to be more of a global citizen, but also they need to understand that so they can navigate right in the workplace and where they're going and what the future is going to be like. And I think that's imperative. We did do this pre and post test as we looked at, as you heard, identify the classes. But it's a challenge, just briefly, that we identify the courses, but we also know that it's a challenge programmatically and institutionally as well as individually for the students, faculty, and staff to really sustain this and do this because of motivation, incentives, biases that we have. We're too busy. So we really have to be intentional to make it meaningful. And we found this very intriguing, and we thought, well, we'd give it a go. So, it has to be now. It's very necessary now to infuse it across experiences and to create different touchstones. Both Joe and John said scaffolding, and I'll use the word also touchstones across. So it's not just I'm going to do a study abroad, but how do we embed this and make it part of our learning and part of our outcomes? And so we have to come up with different touch points. So certainly it needs to occur in different multiple places. So we talked about how important it is to become an interculturally competent communicator, and I think that's what we bring. And one thing we found too is that it's interesting, the different names in the academy for this, isn't it? I mean, global, international, intercultural, but ultimately we're trying to achieve the same thing, this idea of being competent to know when or not to hold the door and to understand how we deal with differences on multiple levels, and then how do we make it sustainable. So what we did with this particular assessment, and it's interesting, I do training and development. Oftentimes one of the, besides concept development, coming up with something new, one of the most often underdeveloped things to do or follow through is evaluation. Did we hit our goals? Did we achieve? Is it worth our effort? Is there a good return on investment? And that's overlooked. So it is, as both colleagues indicated, very important. So we did the pre-test. We have collected the post-test. We just initially looked at that and we saw some differences. And so let me just briefly, I won't go too deep a dive, but what we're looking at, we did online measures. So we did quantitative and qualitative. So in other words, we did a survey-based inventory questionnaire. Then we also did open-ended questions to understand where they were at before the students, 200 about students across multiple classes that we identified, to see where they were at before we redesigned the courses and then determined if it was useful or not in this way to talk about internationalization. And the bottom line is we did see some movement in certain areas, and we're still playing with that and trying to understand what this all means. But the pre-test, the quantitative surveys or the surveys included 7 measures, which go back to what John was talking about with the knowledge, the skill and or behavior, and the attitude, which is at the crux, right? They're all at the crux of competency. So we included 7 measures for these 200, for these classes that we identified, about 200 students. Again, something worth pursuing more of. And then we did a post-test with the same measures and allowed for some of that collection as well. So basically, again, one of the surveys dealt with knowledge, skill or behavior. These are self-perceptions. Again, also the importance of civic and political issues. We thought that was fascinating because how do you look at yourself as a citizen of a community at this level, and does that have any relationship, we're still working with this, to this idea of being a more global citizen? And then awareness of self, society, and others, my place in this and others' perceptions of me. Again, I started off by admitting I'm ethnocentric. And I battle that because the whole world revolves around who I am. And again, the challenges of that. Intention to change, along with awareness. This is an interesting, in other words, based on what I'm learning, do I have intent or idea that I will change behavior, gain certain knowledge, feel differently about the need for? And what we found out, and again, jump in, Joe or John, at this, if you'll go to the next slide, is that some of the results were fascinating in that they were average, which we would expect on the pre-test. And again, there's tons of room for movement. It was on a scale of 1 to 5. So you can see the mean, which means the average, 3 to 4. And we kind of expected people to sit there. But what we did notice is that there is, and there was room for change for us to see that change once we followed up with a post-test and the class. And our sample size was fascinating, probably needs to be a little more diverse. But again, we went with the demographics, characteristics of the audience that we have. Now, there are multiple ways we could do this. We know there are limitations, but just to get an idea of where they were standing before. Again, average scores, room for growth, and forward. So the post-test of this, and we'll get to the open-ended questions too that we asked. We were looking at a number of things such as interest in opportunities that exist. Are they available? Talk about scenarios or instances. Those are some of the open-ended questions that we found. I'll briefly mention the post in just a second. The open-ended responses were fascinating. So we have students that on average are average. And what we found with the analysis of the open-ended as well as the pre-test is that students are interested, and they say that some opportunities exist, but they're not necessarily accessible or noticeable. And we also found that there were scenarios that they share that were good and bad, but we have to prepare students to be a little more aware intentionally to be a part of this. So it's not just necessarily the study abroad trips or talking to faculty and other people that have traveled abroad or taught abroad like Joe and John, but it's also the need to, as we said, scaffold and make it multiple points. And for us as an academic program to work with the Office of International Study program and other co-curriculars and bring that holistic learning into place. So some of the open-ended questions, responses are here. It's critical. We lock ourselves in as exclusively American, and that's lame. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts of the college experience, meeting people that are different than you and being open to that, not just in the classroom, but out. In my college career, I was frequently in class with students of different cultures. In many ways, these differences of culture allowed me to better understand my own culture. So there's that reflection. And a college degree does allow that. A communication degree without courses that consider other cultures would be useless. And again, and we found this description of their experiences. We need to do better. And the post-test, just upon initial comparison, we did find out that there was movement with knowledge, intent to do certain behaviors, description, at least awareness of skill. Not huge, but some, at least in that direction. So we need to see what it all means. But the trick for us is to say that we have room for growth and that we need to be more intentional, and that it's important to look at the total program and the total university or college experience. And I think the challenge, guys, and you can jump in, is this idea of sustainability. Because look what's happened. We've sort of stepped away from it and trying to revisit it and sustain it. This training probably should go on routinely, but there's so many things that we need to be aware of. John did a tremendous job with this. So limitations, what we might do differently. Again, folks, you can jump in as well. There are some. The goal here is for us to maybe broaden that look and to be a little bit more specific, narrow the survey a bit, talk to students individually in classes, talk to maybe students who have international students in class, talk about that opportunity like John and Joe both provide, and then also maybe how they've applied some of these intentional outcomes that we've created and how they've stayed with them in the future. So I think it's fascinating. I think we just touched the tip of the iceberg, Joe. Yeah,
if I could just jump in real fast, I want to point out to everyone to kind of contextualize this a little bit more. We did all of this work before COVID. Mm-hmm. And what I think would be fascinating, not only, I mean, I agree, obviously, with you, Lance, that this should probably be something that's ongoing, probably permanently. But even beyond that, I think it would be important for us to revisit this now, given the pandemic. And of course, things like study abroad have been impacted. You know, all that's been put on hold the past year or so. So the ability to travel abroad has been limited. And that also means that a lot of our normal enrollment of foreign students has decreased substantially as well. So what can we do in the classroom in light of that to kind of make up the difference? But also one of the things that I don't have any statistical evidence to support this. This is just anecdotal, but I think that some of my students, while they understand that the world is becoming more globalized, and that maybe even with COVID, that's become more pronounced because we live in a Zoom world. At the same time, I think that at least for many of our students and maybe even faculty too, we have become much more insular, right? Many of us have not left the house or the apartment very frequently. Most of us have turned inward. We've noticed that mental health issues have been skyrocketing. So I want to suggest, and again, I don't know if this is valid or not, but I want to suggest that while I think there's an awareness that global issues are important and perhaps even more important now than ever, at the same time, I think people are also much more concerned about their own little bubbles, right? Their own little world around them, and trying to figure out what to do next in their own lives, as opposed to worrying so much about what's going on abroad or how they might be more interconnected to people around the globe. And so I think that there's an interesting paradox there worth exploring, and I don't know how as faculty and how the content in the classroom might be adjusted, to fit that dynamic.
No, that's huge. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I want to jump on something Joe says that I think COVID has, in addition to not being able to travel as much, not having international students, it might have been like this beforehand, but I know that as my students come into the classroom, I'll come in, I'm setting my PowerPoint, and almost none of the students are talking to each other. They're on their phones, they're on their laptops. And if I can't get my student to talk to the person next to them in the classroom, why would they be interested in talking to someone from another culture? So I think it's just something for us to be aware of. I think that being involved with other people is a general concern. Lance.
Yeah, definitely. And the little things like that make such a big difference in awareness. And it was fascinating when watching the training. We participated Joe and I did with John, and when he gave it, and the faculty who intuitively knew still stepped up and learned things again for us to make it intentional. And this integrates nicely with other things that we try to do on campus that parallel or work with or integrate with our pillars, from civic engagement to inclusion and diversity and equity, social justice. It's a nice piece of that. And I know it all blends together, but sometimes we have to be very intentional about the one thing. We do need to go in and dig in and take a look at the post and see. We did notice one thing, that women are more likely to consider civic-minded behaviors than men. And I thought that was fascinating. But there's still so much there for us to unpack, and not that many differences between men and women. But certainly it's something that would make them ready, or at least find an interest for study abroad. And we're bringing so much of that here anyway. We are bringing so many opportunities here. So I think the students just need to find it. You don't have to travel abroad to understand internationalization. One of the things I do in one of our senior capstones is I make them bring a job description as we consider the journey from classroom to career, bring a job description that's outside of the domestic United States. Just an example of that and what it would be like. Whether you go outside the domestic United States to work, you will be working with someone from another country, another age demographic, someone who doesn't look like you. It's interesting, and a lot of my college students, our college students already are the other generation now. There's a new generation coming on. And so it's nice, it's interesting to see that these differences need to be dealt with and looking for similarities. So no, I think it's nice. Like I said, Joe and John certainly take it for granted. This is something I've had to work to achieve. And fascinating. I get to go hopefully to Paris. We have one of our study abroad programs. I'll be going to Paris in the summer And it's not what I learned, according to the students. I hear many of them say with your trips as well, is that the experience of a lifetime. Wow. What I learned from talking to people, from pairing up with somebody, to being in another country, being with somebody different than me, is so valuable. And so how can we accomplish that?
Just a couple of reflections on what Lance says, and we turn it to questions and answers, or people sharing their own internationalization efforts in their own units. First of all, Lance, you're talking about women being more likely to be civically engaged than men. You may find when you do your study abroad trip that we often have more women go on the trips than men as well. But the other thing I do think, recommend what Lance says, is I think that the idea of diversity, inclusion, and equity has similar ideas and motivations and can't really be divorced with our understanding of cultural difference as well. So I think we can see these as separate, but at least related things to focus on. Maybe this is a time to turn it over to questions and answers. And I think the idea is Matt can read the questions so everyone drops their questions in if they want. If no one has any questions, then I might field a question to say, what are you doing? Because each of you has brought something to this seminar, your own personal experiences, some good and useful that other people could learn from, or some questions that you might have. So this could also be a chance for you to bring your own experiences to the discussion. Matt.
So yeah, as John said, at this point, if you have questions or if you have experiences you'd like to share, please put them in our Q&A function, and I will be happy to read them to our presenters and to you all as the audience.
Wait, I have a question. I don't know. Somebody must have texted this to me. Lance, did Joe and John really make you hold the door for them? Yes. So, yeah.
Well, and we made them buy lunch too, so.
All right, we'll wait here for. These to come in.
Gentlemen, can I ask you too, while we're waiting for Matt to bring a question, did this process of internationalization and becoming more of a global citizen, did that change how you teach? I'm assuming that the answer is yes. What have you noticed? I mean, how you do things in class, waiting for moments of silence, just an awareness. What did it do to change your teaching?
I'll start with this. My main area of teaching is culture and intercultural communication. So these are sorts of things I've been studying and doing for years, but I continue to learn, usually from things I do wrong from students. So one of the things I do is I try to give as clear of detail as possible. I don't assume a student knows what a position paper is or a journal article summary or whatever, or even a research paper. And I found that my American students appreciate that extra detail and spelling out my objectives and expectations as much as the international students do.
I think that I would agree that for me, every semester is a learning experience for me as well. And one of the things that I really enjoy is to learn from the experiences of the students, and opening up that kind of opportunity. I always start with the premise that even though I've traveled, a lot and have a lot of experience in this sort of stuff, I don't know everything, and certainly there's a lot that I don't know, and I'm always going to be a work in progress. And so I strongly encourage the students to share their experiences too. And so I always learn a lot, and I feel like if I'm learning, then hopefully the students are too.
To start in here, Dr. Lippert, you referred to yourself as ethnocentric. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you meant by that?
For me, it's just assuming that, I hate to assume, but thinking that the world is how I see it. And growing up in Western Kansas, I had a limited view of the horizon. And briefly put, it's taken me a while to understand that the world's quite different than what I'm accustomed to, and such as not everybody speaks English. Not every world is a certain fate, everybody in the world. So just looking at the world from how I think it should be and expecting others to act that way based on my experience. Is that fair, Joe or John? Yeah. Okay. Good question. Thank you.
So Patrick and Ponsa, you had put in here what specific things has ISU done to internationalize the curriculum. John, I see that you're writing an answer, but those are some of the things that we've tried to cover in this presentation. So I'll leave it to John to answer, but if there are specific questions related to the presentation, I'll let you go into that. I do want to read a statement from Lin Zhu. I got a TOEFL of 105, but to my surprise, I had to study Christian theology in my first semester, along with three other courses, in total 12 credits. That is when I started thinking about the fairness of my program designing, and I was thrilled to learn the concept of internationalization. That makes me very happy to hear the work that you're doing. So a nice, wonderful statement to share there. Will says, I want to touch on what Dr. Baldwin had mentioned. I was on an ISU study abroad to Paris back in summer of 2018, and there were 17 students involved, but only 2 of us were male. We as a group learned so much about Paris, and for me, it was a major culture shock, as I'm from a small central Illinois farm town, and being in a big city like Paris was really neat, and learning about the differences in American and Parisian cultures. So again, another statement to back up the impact of these types of experiences.
I like that phrase, culture shock. You know, whether you're from, central Illinois or western Kansas and you go to Chicago, you're going to have culture shock. And Joe and John, you can attest. Is that what it's about? Just noticing those drastic differences, or are we that different?
Well, I mean, that's part of it, but I think another realization is to notice the similarities, right? I mean, I think that sometimes there has to be a balance, right? I mean, because if you only focus on difference, then that runs the risk of people, perhaps some people feeling like they might be superior, or that those differences can be divisive. And so we also want to see similarities between people and groups. But you don't want to focus too much on that either, because then you ignore some of the valuable differences that occur. So we have to strike a balance there. And there's no magical formula for that. But I think, and maybe John might disagree with this, I don't know, but I think that the best way really to try to find that balance, or to try to understand similarities as well as differences, is through experience. And unfortunately, not everybody has that opportunity. But I think that's part of our job, though, as an institution of higher learning, is to try to offer as many opportunities as possible for our students to have experiences with people that come from different cultures and different social positions, because we can learn from each other as a result of that, and through those experiences grow as a global community.
Yeah, actually, Joe, I wouldn't disagree at all. Often if a student is talking to me, we talk about what's called a multicultural person, the person who's really able to understand another culture. And really the only way to do that beyond book knowledge is to have a breaking down of your categories and your mental structures, which doesn't just happen even in a 2-week trip to Paris. There's obviously change, and it's wonderful to go, and it's a life-changing, but it's that semester abroad or a year abroad that really changes someone, or having a close friendship with someone from another culture, where you're hanging out and spending time and eating together and drinking together, root beer, of course. So it is those living together with people that's going to change us the most and make us the most, probably the most competent in the end. Otherwise, it's like anything. I can study, and right now I'm studying Italian, and I can certainly understand Italian, but I can't speak it. And I want to be able to speak culture. And to speak it, at some point I have to live it.
And that goes to one of the questions that was asked: what are we doing to internationalize our curriculum? So there are things we can do to help people, students, us, anticipate culture shock and maybe the differences and similarities, but then it has to be experienced to really truly live it. Are there other, I know there are a number of things that come from the Office of International Studies program, and what we're doing is just one example. Do you feel like we're on the right track in internationalizing our campus, Joe, John, or Matt? What do you think?
I feel like it would be presumptuous of me to go too far into that, but I know that you all have highlighted a lot of the different things that we are also trying to do as an office to help expose the campus community to aspects of international culture, or global culture. So there are certainly things, including the grant that you received and other initiatives that our office has been doing and will continue to do to help sponsor that growth. I know, John, you had mentioned International Education Week. We have not been able to do a full International Education Week in a while, just because of the things going on with COVID and because of some certain things that we would like to do with the campus community. International Education Week has always fallen on a weird timeline. It's usually the week before everybody leaves for break for the fall. So that has programmatically not been the most ideal placement for that type of celebration. But we do have a number of activities and programs that we traditionally do on campus, including our International Fair, our International Gala Night, again, in the hopes of exposing not just domestic students to international culture, but also as an opportunity for international students who are here to share and learn from each other. So those are other things that I think that I would want to draw attention to and make sure that the campus recognizes these are still going on.
And I do know the Center for Teaching and Learning Technology has great staff. They do great things with redesign, and they touch on this as well. And we would certainly put John out for hire for training. And but I wish more faculty we could sit down and be intentional if that incentive would be there beyond the obvious. So I think there are a number of things we have to continue to live up to those core values, right? That we say individually and programmatically. One of the quick things I've noticed with our program, I study health communication, and international students have recently looked at our health services and our wellness programs to see how international students access that and to see how they're responded to. Had one international student who was here, literally almost gave birth to her child in one of my classes, and how she was treated off campus by a physician that had never had an international person as a patient, but it was difficult for her to communicate her wishes about how this birth would happen. And so even something at that level, the health level, is talking about internationalization to create that awareness. So, and baby and mom were healthy and have moved on. It's great. But those are some examples, maybe.
Let me address Lynn Zhu's question, and that is the challenges we face with internationalization. I think the biggest change especially since COVID, is at least the School of Communication has had a drastic reduction in international students. And I would have graduate seminars, intercultural intergroup seminar that would have people from 6 different countries in it, as well as diverse Americans. And they actually had to cancel the seminar this year because of lack of students. So international students are a big part of our graduate program, and our American students learn so much from them, as do we as faculty. So I think that is one of the biggest barriers. And the other barrier that Joe has already mentioned is just a general, if anything, a sense of a withdrawal or into oneself that seems to be heightened to me by the COVID crisis.
And I would say that there's also a challenge among some of our peers, some of our faculty peers. Some professors are a little reluctant to internationalize their classes, and I think there are various reasons for that. I mean, some of them may not see the value in it, to be honest with you, but I think that's a real minority of faculty who might feel that way. I think a majority of faculty probably just feel like they feel inadequate in teaching international material, and so that's one of the reasons why we did the training in our major, is so that our faculty could feel more competent, they could feel more confident in their abilities. But I think that that's something that needs to be considered as well. Like, if you're thinking about it in institutionalizing international curriculum or internationalization of classes and co-curricular activities, we need to make sure that faculty feel like they're comfortable in teaching this material.
I'm going to bounce off of something that Julie Lynn says in the chat. I think another barrier, but it's not a recent barrier, and that is American students' dislike of foreign languages and feeling either that they're not practical or that they're no good in them. And I think, if anything, my love for other cultures began in the foreign language class. And I think I was actually looking for this link and was about to, I thought I'd posted this link, and I see that Julie also posted the link from the languages, cultures, literatures, languages, and cultures, languages, literatures, and cultures major, links about internationalizing through study of cultures and language. That's another way to encourage students to internationalize.
I was just about to pop up that website to show. So I think at this point, and again, we're running short on time here, so I will transition over to start to end our presentation here. But if we did not get to your question, please feel free to email internationalseminar@IllinoisState.edu, and we will relay your question to our presentation team. Once again, we would like to thank Dr. Baldwin, Dr. Lippert, Dr. Zompetti so much for your informative presentation and answering the questions. Again, we sincerely appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you so much. All right. I would also like to thank all of you who were able to join us today in the audience and watch this presentation and support this series. We are proud to continue to offer this series to the ISU and Bloomington Normal community and provide information, again, on issues that impact all of us across the globe. Please note that next week, due to the ISU Founders Day celebration, we will not actually have a seminar series event. We want the campus to focus on that. But we hope that you will be able to join us on February 23rd for our next event in our series. This will be titled Study Abroad Student Perspective, and it will feature Alex Ratcliffe Hanger, who is the program coordinator for our Study Abroad unit, and a panel of ISU Study Abroad students. So if you have not yet done so, we invite you to register for the rest of the events in this series. Please visit IllinoisState.edu/SeminarSeries to find information about that. And again, I thank you all for being here today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and go Redbirds. Take care, everybody. We'll sign off on that. Goodbye.